fortunately, that you use, and that many evolutionists use when they discuss religion, is the kind of religion that most of us theologians have problems with as well. Creationism, intelligent design. We see all of that as quite deficient. Not only bad science, but horrible theology as well. So it bothers me that you keep holding up to as a paradigm, as the paradigmatic examples of science or of religion or of morality, what most theologians take to be, take just as critically as you do. Now, I know your answer is, well, you're just the theologians. I'm talking to most of the people. I've heard you say this. But you don't seem to be aware of how much theology has shaped popular religion over the ages. Who shaped Christianity? After St. Paul, the most important shaper of it was a theologian, Augustine. And today, theologians are not completely irrelevant to the shaping of Christian faith. And aside from the fundamentalist churches that you're talking about, most of the pastors in mainline Christian churches have been influenced by theologians like Karl Barth, Paul Tillich, and others, who themselves have been even much more critical of intelligent design and creationism than evolutionists have. So I'm hoping that we could bring the discussion to, I guess, a higher level in terms of having you converse with theology and not just with what we would consider to be twisted and often perverted forms of religiosity. So yeah, I would agree with you. We should ask for forgiveness, if that's what we're saying.
You know, one thing here, and this is the privilege of all of us, is that we're in the presence of a very high-flown, nuanced, intelligent conversation that's going on here among people who have studied deeply their subjects and thought about the subjects of each other. And that is a rarity. It's a rarity in American life and American discourse these days. One of the things that confronts us when religion and science come into play in some sort of pairing is, can there be a way of communicating some of the points and the research that you all have? Or is the dialogue going to be lost? Is it going to be simply sort of confined to two really distant extremes? And referring to, yes, you're absolutely right, Dr. Dennett, no one within miles, I think, would defend creation science. And yet, creation science is what gets written about so often, because they do have the creation scientists access to microphones and the intelligent designers who succeeded them. And it does create, in some ways, a perverted picture, a distorted picture of what's going on. What is the way around that?
Good question, and I think it has an answer. It has a good answer, and one which you might not expect. And it's where an ecological approach to religions really comes in handy. There's a wonderful book called Sacred and Secular by Ronald Engelhard and Pippa Norris. They're good social scientists. They don't use the E word. But their thesis is, in fact, extremely evolutionary, which is that fundamentalism has a home. It has an environment in which it is well adapted, and that environment is one of existential insecurity. So if you compare places of the world like Scandinavia, for example, which are existentially very secure, with places like the Middle East, which are existentially very insecure, it should not be a puzzle to us why liberalism and why the enlightened forms, what we would call enlightened forms of religion, thrives in Scandinavia, whereas fundamentalism thrives in the Middle East. Because if your life is so existentially insecure, guess what? Your little wimpy mainline liberal religion is not going to do you very well. Whereas a strong religion, as a fundamentalist would put it, is going to do you much better. And so if we want to eradicate fundamentalism, there's actually one way and only one way to do it: make the world more existentially secure. But if you actually puzzle about how irrational those folks are and you take it out of ecological context, forget about it. You're not going to get rid of it, no matter how mindless it seems to you. So I think it's very important to understand why cultures exist. They exist because they are adapting the people to those environments. And so that means if you don't like some aspect of a culture, and indeed there's much not to like, you just don't think about changing the culture, think about changing the environment. And when you do that, then you can get what you want for free. So I think that that's an extremely important point to make.
The environment would have to be changed through education, though, would it not?
Not necessarily.
Education is a large part of it.
Yes.
I mean, I think right now that the step that would make the most dramatic difference the quickest is if we could somehow arrange for women in Islam to be educated universally. I think that in itself would be a major, major change. I think I agree entirely with David that if you look at basic security issues, socioeconomic issues, and just the goodness of life, you find that where life is dire, that's where fundamentalism flourishes, and for just the reasons that he said. So I also agree with him that the way to change that is not to hoot at fundamentalists, because they aren't going to listen. And besides, well, that's just a waste of your energy. What you want to do is make the world better where they are, and their fundamentalism will no longer be as attractive.
Well, just a point that President Obama, when he was in Cairo, did make the education of women front and center, part of one of the things that he called for. I want to ask Dr. Haught, excuse me, when we talk about fundamentalism here, are we talking about one particular thing?
Well, the part of fundamentalism that I would focus on from an intellectual point of view is the way in which it interprets its scriptures, and we usually refer to that as literalistic. And I think that's, I agree with what David said, there's a social dimension we have to take into account too, but I agree with Dan also that there's an intellectual dimension to this discussion. I think of Alfred North Whitehead, who back in the early 20s said that science and religion are the two most important forces that shape culture and civilization, and that the very future of civilization depends upon science and religion getting along with one another. But one of the obstacles to that, of course, is literalism. The other obstacle on the part of the intellectual world is what I would call scientism, which I think is not far removed from a kind of fundamentalism and literalism too. So it's fundamentalism at different levels. And we all have a tendency, because of our longing for certitude, we have a tendency, a temptation. One of the great temptations of intellectual life as well as of religion is towards certitude, and certitude here and now. And one way to get that is to look for scriptural certitude, or certitude by belonging to an intellectual community in which scientific evidence seems to be the criterion of all kinds of truth. Well, if we're going to get science and religion together, we have to get beyond both kinds of literalism. It's not too hard to get beyond scientism from an intellectual point of view. Scientism says take nothing on faith, but yet it takes faith to embrace scientism. Therefore, scientism should not be taken. So if we just reflect upon scientism itself, I think we can find it's a self-subverting sort of worldview that leads in turn to another worldview called scientific naturalism, which is the view that nature, insofar as it is available to science itself, is all there is. You've bounded your sense of reality by a kind of certitude, which is, in my view, and maybe I'm being tendentious in using this term, not completely distinct from the kind of fundamentalism, obsession with certitude that you find in religious community too. There we have to get beyond literalism. And that's going to be a very, very difficult thing to do. I mean, I could give you some suggestions. We could go back, for example, to Galileo and point out that Galileo, in his famous letter to the Grand Duchess Christina, says that we should not be looking for scientific information in Scripture. And that is the source of so much mischief, especially in our country, in this whole thing called the Darwin Wars is